right, Deric Rosenbaum, welcome to the show, man. I'm delighted to finally have you here.
It's awesome to be here. Thanks for having me today. Excited to talk about the things we do.
Ah, nice. I am very excited to get your points of view. We have some very strong opinions and some hot takes coming up, of which I'm very excited for people to hear. I always like to start the pod by asking my guests to introduce themselves, because I always joke that I have a bit of a knack for botching and underselling my guests. So I'd rather have them hype themselves up and really hold back their humility when they're explaining who they are. So, Deric, would you mind telling us a bit about yourself, who you are, what you do, and most importantly, how you got to where you are today?
Sure. So I'm Deric Rosenbaum. I am the president of Groucho's Deli. We are an 83-year-old delicatessen brand based out of Columbia, South Carolina, currently with 30 locations in the Carolinas and Georgia. My journey to today started in 1999. My best friend at the time was the third generation of Groucho's family members of the founder of the brand. At the time, I was building commercial restaurant spaces, catering halls. So he's like, I know restaurants, you know building. Let's start franchising and we'll go from there. So we opened up franchise one, two, three, learned the whole operations side of the business. We scaled up to like 8 or 9 stores, 10 stores, and then we were like, let's learn the distribution side of how all of this works. So we built our own commissary, we did our own distribution, like nose to tail distribution, everything across the board. Learned that side of the business, turned around and sold it a few years later to a large broadline distributor. We now control all of our grocery distribution. We just don't touch it. So we still handle all the contract negotiations. I guess in around 2010, we started coming up with this concept of around like a digital infrastructure of a franchise in a box, and how do we plug all these things in, all the various cogs that we use, whether it's loyalty, gift cards, point of sale, fill in the blank, labor scheduling. And this was still very early on, and we were all on legacy POS
Yeah.
systems at the time, right? The old client server models and window crashes and all the things that happen with that. And we evolved into the cloud December 2019. Good, lucky for us, because COVID was literally around the corner. We've had native online ordering since 2015. All of this is fully integrated with our mobile app. So loyalty, all of these things talk together, and we basically stitched together this giant tech infrastructure for Groucho's, and it allows us to be autonomous because we're not beholden to a single company that controls everything that we do. So yeah, I mean, literally, I've done everything in this business from setting up restaurants to building restaurants to I've actually shockingly designed 90% of Groucho's. So with my construction background, it definitely still comes in handy
Yeah.
a lot. I can talk to contractors and I know what I'm looking at. So
Yeah.
it's very helpful a lot of times.
The sniff
Um,
test.
yeah, I can smell bullshit a mile away. Um,
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's kind of the quick and down and dirty. I mean, today most of my stuff is around, optimizing and refining our tech stack. The landscape with especially around restaurant tech is so rapidly changing. So we got to keep up with that, and then working with, setting strategy around how we operate as a company. So, I mean, I still deal with operations, I still deal with marketing, I still just work with supply chain. So I've got my hands in lots of different things, but generally I'm kind of setting the course and letting the team run their respective lanes.
Yeah, and I think that's a cool kind of philosophy to have. I think like technology being the unlock for everybody else within the organization. Like, how do you work more efficiently? How do you work smarter? Like you mentioned, like legacy systems, there are still many restaurants, hospitality businesses out there that have not even begun their first foray into sort of modern API driven,
Real
database
time
driven sort
actionable
of
data.
yeah, to like basically really like real time actionable data. Exactly. And it's amazing in the sense you mentioned like say 2015. I mean, I guess like the first CDPs were kind of coming on board at that time, like kind of very kind of hitting their stride. We're 9 years into that sort of real evolution now. And I say that in the sense that having worked in like media agencies in my past, I remember we were shilling CDPs. When I say, I probably shouldn't say shilling is the word, but it was very much like emphasizing the need for large sort of brands, like we're talking your P&Gs and your VWs that could invest in massive like would have massive amounts of customer data to like start utilizing first party data for their own sort of marketing and customer acquisition strategies. Right. And now I guess what's interesting is, restaurants are kind of coming up to that like, you've got your VWs or your Chevrons with that amount of data. Now they're having access to tools like that. Now anyone can kind of get in and play in this game. And there's a bigger understanding of what the power of first party data can do. I guess when you think about like the tech stack, and designing a tech stack, where would you start if you were to join if you were to set up an imaginary, like, let's call your restaurant chain Marx's, for example. Okay. And, because Groucho.
I got the joke.
Yeah, I was hoping for a smile. But let's say you open Karl Marx's.
Let's go with Harpo.
Yeah. Let's say you open that, like, and you get to say 5 locations. Okay, starting at 5 locations where you're kind of hitting your stride of like an inflection point of like where you can go. Well, how would you think about designing a technology infrastructure for that size?
Given where we are today, I think at 5 locations, you have enough economies of scale to afford a CDP that is restaurant specific, because you need that data to understand your guests in order to compete in today's modern marketplace. Like, the game has changed. Like you said, 2015, no one could afford CDP in the restaurant space. I mean, maybe a handful of people, Starbucks, CKE, but generally speaking, it's only become available to the SMB and the middle market in the last, I don't know, 2 to 3 years, really.
Yeah.
And it's absolutely game changing for the way we operate, because not only is operations using this tool, marketing is using this tool, I'm using this tool for strategy. So I mean, we're measuring literally everything, frequency, retention, churn, P-mix, day parts. I mean, and every 1,000 combinations thereof is like, if this, then that, if this, then that. And I mean, you could literally distill it down to 2 customers, right?
Yeah.
Who are gluten-free, only eat on Thursdays between 4 and 6, right? I mean, it's really, it's how do you want to look at your data? So to me, having that integrated into your point of sale would be step 1 if you had 5 or more locations. I don't know that an independent restaurant, unless you just have this massive store volume, could afford a CDP. There is an entry point, right? So you got to have some economies of scale to get there.
Yeah, exactly that. And I guess, it's hard to know what you need when you don't know what you need. And I guess, when it comes to CDPs, I think like for a lot of people, contextually, they kind of make sense. You know what I mean? Like if you were to like pick a man off the street and say, unaided awareness test, do you know what a CDP is? I think you'd probably get 1 in 100. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
And so like a platform that has such value, like a genie in a bottle, but it's hard to know what the genie on the inside looks like or what it can do for you. When you talk to people, and when you talk out loud about like CDPs to like, somebody asks you, or, like you're trying to give it, how would you describe like material impact that a CDP can give you? Like if you were to get it going, like how could it like really impact somebody's business at say 5 locations pretty quickly?
I mean, I liken it to this. I mean, CDP has now become, if the integration's dialed in and you're getting all of the data from every sales channel, from every touch point that you possibly could in your restaurant, it becomes your source of truth. It replaces the generic reporting coming out of your point of sale system. It replaces the reporting coming out of your white label online ordering. It replaces a lot of the data. I mean, I think outside of the reputation management piece, CDP covers it all. And to your point, I think the 1 in 100 comment, I think a lot of people know what a CRM is, and some people equate a CRM as a CDP, and it's not. It's 2 completely two completely different things. I mean, it's a CDP is a CRM on steroids, lots of
Yeah.
steroids. Um, yeah, I mean, it is our source of truth. So, I mean, how do we measure X, Y, Z? You know, do we have a new product item, or are we changing store hours, or I mean, really, we don't do a lot of LTOs here, so we don't really measure that component so much. But you know, if we do a marketing push around pastrami per se, we can almost instantly measure the results in real
Yeah.
time. And you know, are we moving the needle very quickly? So we just started SMS texting last week. So I mean, we can measure that like the next day. You
Yeah.
know, you don't have to wait till the end of the month. You don't have to wait till the end of the quarter. Everything's real time.
Totally. And that's amazing. I had somebody on in like probably the last month or so. We were talking about this in terms of like, even in terms of like, you talked about like generic dashboards and generic data from like your point of sale tools now, and it's not as strong as a CDP. Even that kind of level of data, like before, you'd have to wait after the weekend's take and tot it all up, and you'd have like a manual book to understand, and that could be a Wednesday to understand how last Friday performed. So you're
Correct.
talking about a lag of 5 or 6 days before you can even dive into it. And you can't really cut and paste that data because it's in a book. Whereas what you're able to tell me is if we're going to launch a new like vegan pastrami sandwich and we want to see how well this will work.
Sounds horrible.
I have somebody I should introduce you to, but like, but if you think about it in the sense like being able to see the demand of that product in real time, that you add this as a test item in a particular store, and you see that over a couple of days you're able to move volume of this vegan pastrami sandwich, and like, okay, now we have some data that can like back up a hypothesis that there's a potential demand for this
But
product.
not just that. I mean, you also can measure, is this an increasing frequency amongst our habitual guests? Is this bringing in a whole new group of new guests that weren't here prior to this product being launched? I mean, it's really that detailed. So,
Yeah,
I mean, if you can hone that in and refine those strategies, given, you know, these data inputs, I mean, I think it's really limitless.
which is awesome. And I think that is like the fact that it's limitless kind of shows its power, and also shows like, okay, you need somebody who's really good at understanding what this is. Because I think, we talked before about closed and open APIs, for example, okay? And obviously, to have your own CDP is by very definition leaning into open APIs everywhere to feed data in there. But not every tool, not every service wants you to share that kind of data, or wants to share their data into your CDP, or shares it in a form like a more not as raw form possible to be like synthesized by you. Like when you think about building out the CDP and dealing with sort of more closed APIs of like tools, how does that affect like your business decisions in terms of using those tools kind of going forward?
I mean, I am first and foremost, I'm an open API guy all the way around. I'm not looking for a full tech suite solution in a box. I want to build to, you know, I I guess there's really two concepts. There's best in breed, and then there's best of fit. I believe in best of fit. So what is my brand's objectives? What do I need this tool to do today, tomorrow, and into the future? Can they be both? They can absolutely be both, but they're not always both. And for me, especially I've been struggling with this the last month because we're looking at a different, like a core component of our tech stack right now,
Yeah.
just giving it a solid evaluation. And, you know, are we in the right place, or should we, I mean, we're doing a little due diligence outside. And, but I've had lots of calls around other pieces of technology, especially stuff that's really starting to go deep into the weeds with AI and voice AI. And I still think we're very early, but it's coming, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely, it's coming. And what it's really proven to me is this whole closed loop model just doesn't make sense, because if we're changing at a rate of, you know, the tech turnover is, you know, like an 18 to 36 month cycle now, with
Yeah.
how rapidly we're evolving in whatever the space might be: reputation management, voice ordering, call to text, phone automation, fill in the blank, loyalty, gift cards, dynamic XYZ. I as a steward of the brand need able, if this tool is no longer solving that problem for me, I need to be able to pull that out and plug another one in. And that's why I am 100% against against the closed loop model. Does the closed loop model make sense for some people and some brands? Absolutely. I see it as the easy button. I don't, and to me, it just comes across as generic white label product. I want the stuff that I put out to be brand centric, brand forward, convey my brand, convey the message. But I mean, there's other pieces, like when we're evaluating a new piece of technology, we kind of have like a five question quick piece. It's actually right here. I keep it on a picture. I keep it on a picture right next to me. So in my office,
keeping you honest.
Does it increase profitability and productivity? Is it on brand? Is it easy to use? Not just for us, but for our operators, right? Because operators are operators, and a lot of them are not tech savvy. Does it integrate with our non-negotiables, whatever that case may be for your brand? Does it scale across all locations? And if it is a front of the house, customer interacting technology, is it guest first, tech second? Tech for the sake of tech is not always the best solution.
It's interesting because hearing those five, it leans into like, is this just simply the best solution that we can get today? Do you know what I mean? Whether it's for ourselves or whether it's for the customer, like at the end of the day, is it just ticking that box for us or them in the context of what the question is? And like, you think about that a lot. Like, I mean, at the end of the day, like crowbarring in tech because it's cool. Like, I'll tell you what I have a lot of disdain for. Okay. And I'll tell you why. And I have no qualms calling this out because technically this business isn't really a hospitality business, but data analytics tools. Okay. Like, something like Amplitude. Okay. I put those guys on blast all the time. And I'll tell you why, because they'll charge for a tool that demands so much implementation from data engineering and eng on the customer side. And for them to operate it like as if it's a SaaS, like, oh, just log in and connect your segment or your data in a warehouse and it'll be fine. And it's like, no, nobody knows how to create custom events except for an engineer. And I don't have his time for another 6 to 8 weeks. So this implementation does not work without eng, but it's sold to like marketing teams. And then they'll charge you 50 grand a year for the pleasure of what you could actually do in the Google Sheet. And that is where I look at crowbarring in technology solutions as like such a problem for internal teams. Obviously, my customer facing problems are less so because I guess I don't have to like necessarily A, deal with them, and then B, like, like I don't have any sort of like insight on like we're just an SMS tool on a very practical level for like our sort of candidates in our candidate pool. But when I think about the SaaS that I'm involved in, because I am a marketer and every single SaaS that's basically invented is like designed almost exclusively for marketers, I see such a sea of them. And I feel like I can justify crowbarring something if the price is right or if they can work with me on price. But when I see SaaS that comes in with obnoxious pricing or like demanding annual like kind of contracts to bring in a piece of tech that I know is like, I don't know if my team will kind of buy into this or will we get the buy-in? And like, I like to your ideology, it's all about testing these things. It's like, okay, I want to see if this has a benefit for us as a team, has a benefit for the company, can it make a bigger unlock? Like, what's the unlock? It's time, it's efficiency, it's money, it's like opportunity.
I mean, a lot of what you're saying goes back to this whole legacy mindset. When the small group of technology providers pretty much controlled the industry, right? And it was all gate kept, and each little component was its own SaaS, or you had to pay professional services to go query your own data.
Yeah.
Come on, man. This is 2024. Your data should be at your fingertips. And I mean, I'm 100% with you. Like gatekeeping is that just doesn't exist anymore. And I tend to lean into companies that are industry specific and not across. Yeah. I don't need a company that does transportation and healthcare and grocery. I want somebody that's restaurant specific, that
Yeah,
understands my industry and is solving for the problems in our industry and specifically our brand, because every brand has different objectives, right? And whatever they may be. So, how do you find a tool that solves for all of that? And, you know, you know, uh, CDP for me solves for so many things because it's not just data insights. It's not just marketing automation. It's not just a segmentation
yeah,
tool. It's not just, we actually layer in demographic data. So, I mean, we have built this beautiful profile of our ideal customer or an ICP. And so, I mean, we take that and then we're just like, so how do we increase frequency and retention with these data sets, right? And if you layer that in with some AI, and I mean, it's really limitless.
totally. I mean, I look at a CDP like a sandpit for a child. They can kind of jump in there and they can kind of do what they want with it, but like the sand is like what makes it all happen, and it's like the sand is the data, you know.
Your data is malleable, and
Yeah,
yeah,
it's totally malleable, and I think like I guess like I think for people like listening to the pod, like that are kind of like thinking about this, everyone should be thinking about how they use their data to optimize their business. I think like first and foremost, if you're not, I mean, I don't know what to say to somebody if you're not. I mean, my God, I mean it's especially like post COVID, where the vast majority, I would say, well, it's not even an evolution. There's been like a revolution in technology in restaurants, in hospitality over the last 4 years, where there was dipping your toe in was kind of the way, kind of half-heartedly kind of taking an approach to technology. Now it's everything. I
I
mean,
mean, you got to take risks. We took risks early on with online ordering, but I mean, ultimately, it saved us from COVID. Like, it sounds weird, but we had curbside functionality already built into our online ordering tools. We didn't use it. I mean, the day they shut our dining rooms down, it was literally toggle on, change some messaging, and bam, we were set up and ready to go. I mean, yes, we had to do some operational tweaks for a couple weeks to get all that completely dialed in because I
yeah,
mean we're adding basically a whole new channel, but two other channels shut down. So I think if you don't have this modern, malleable, adaptable, agile tech stack, you're not going to be able to compete in the long term. I just don't see how you are because it's slow data if you're legacy.
totally. And I guess, when I think about it, like, I mean, you've got your sort of POS sort of offerings that are offering kind of closed APIs effectively in terms of data. You've got your third party tools, which are kind of giving you a kind of an element of data, but really it's kind of again pretty close, like you're kind of living within their systems. I guess, you know, we talked about this before, you can swim in these channels, but like you got to be where your clients are. But at the same time, you really got to be like native to your own land. Your own land is your data,
Correct. I mean, you have to. I mean, not owning your data is non-negotiable. Like in my world, non-negotiable.
which is kind of like, and I'm glad that you're so affirmative about that because I'm like really, I feel like we're like hammering that message, but like I honestly, I'm like, how in God's name could you not anymore? Do you know what I mean? Especially if you're like, I think that 5 locations is like that unlock kind of territory where it's the entry point cost efficiency for many like sort of restaurant businesses to be like, okay, now you need to start taking this stuff seriously. It's like almost like going to college. You know what I mean? It's like, yeah, you're out on your own now. Like you got to figure this thing out. And like I think like there's not a lack of information out there in terms of how to make this happen. I guess like the technological implementation, when you were talking about say 2019, like say you said you kind of got the system kind of up and running at the back end just in time for COVID, but like I should like
Who knew?
who knew? We got there. We knew. Like the preparation for that strategy, like how long did that run take you?
So prior to that, we were on a legacy system, and the big global company system, and they had purchased a bunch of other point of sale solutions, basically acquiring merchant processing is what they were doing.
Yeah.
And they had decided to sunset our product, tried to put me on an inferior product, and I'm like, no, we're leaving. And so we spent 6 months doing lots of due diligence on different cloud-based platforms, and we were in the 11th and a half hour with another major cloud-based platform, and the deal kind of fell through. Um, to no fault of ours. And so my back was against the wall. We had to make a decision, really. We had to go. So we built it, we tweaked it, we spent months. I mean, you got to put in the work, especially on a new build. You got
Yeah.
to put the work's all on the front end, like building that menu out and building those modifiers and how does each one of these things, and at that point it was still kind of like omni-channel was in its very early infancy, like
Yeah.
DoorDash and Grubhub, and most of them were still in just only major cities. So that really wasn't on our radar. So it was really just our four-wall store mark, and then our native digital channels were kind of our considerations at the time. I mean, we recently just, well, the beginning of the year, we launched an entirely new customer-facing menu because we further optimized it for those channels and removed friction for not only our guests but also for kitchen throughput. Different story, different podcast, but um, it's you got to put in the work. I mean, we literally saved complex tickets from all over the chain and make sure we had built for all of these use cases. Literally keying in and seeing how it prints in the kitchen for kitchen throughput, so to minimize confusion. And we sent in the equipment early. We built these huge training packets, online trainings. We had online webinars. I at the time wanted to minimize the impact to our customers because we were
Yeah.
migrating also our loyalty program and our gift card program. So those all had liability balances, right? And those had to get
Yeah.
transferred into new platforms. And there's going to be an up-down period when you do this, and
Yeah.
there's really no way not to have that. And I was like, we're going to minimize the impact to our customers. So we swapped out point of sale systems overnight for the entire chain. I don't know that I recommend that, but
You gotta run, man, before you can walk. Isn't that what they say?
sometimes you got to just rip off the band-aid. But
Yeah.
yeah, it really gets down to you got to put in the work. You got to know not what your objectives are today, but where you're trying to get.
Yep.
If you're 5 stores a day, are you wanting to cap out at 10, or are you wanting to cap out at 1,000? Because that's a completely different infrastructure
Yeah.
on from a scalability standpoint. So
But I
these are all
got,
the
I got.
it's just
Yeah, go
not
ahead.
one component. You got to make sure everything's working and talking and delivering to every aspect of your business, whether it's operations, supply chain, technology, marketing, whatever.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, this like honestly is a huge undertaking. Like, if somebody heard you say that, they're like, "Oh my God, like I gotta take all these things into consideration if I just want to solve like customer loyalty." Because as you know, you gotta like when they built the subway, they didn't build it for the traffic in 1840. They built it for the traffic that they were thinking they were going to get 100 years later in terms of putting bodies in.
Right.
And so, like, same kind of concept here. It's like you got to build for the type of scale that you expect. And so, do you have a large tech team over there, Groucho? So, like, how? Because I mean, it's not like
Uh,
you're actually like a data engineer yourself per se. Like, I mean, like by training and by you've done it all. But like, do you have like a team of eng that like helped you kind of make this happen, or because it's interesting
so
from it's such a tech forward approach. So big ups to you, Derek.
here I'll put on my CTO hat. So
Oh, CTO hats on. It says tractor.
I do wear many hats here, and it is the joke that I'm the resident CTO. But yes, so I spend a lot of time vetting my partnerships,
Yeah.
and so like in making sure that the people we're doing business with are receptive to, development takes time, right? And never ever goes as planned. But I work with companies that are receptive to doing custom dev work for us to get us where we need to be. But as far as my team, we're really small. It's me and two people on our operations team are cross trained. And then some of it we farm out. So like the managed firewall, the 4G LTE failover, all that stuff we farm out to an outside party. So that's off of our plate.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, that makes sense because again, like I think for people probably like hearing this, they're like, I'm a restaurant. We don't have technology chops internally, like, or we might have, some kind of
And I
consultant that
think
helps
that's why
us. But
the all-in-one systems have found great success
yeah.
because it's the easy button. And
Yeah.
they can give you cookie cutter marketing out of the box. We'll send you a birthday email. We'll send you a static lapsed email campaign. I mean, with CDP now, all of that is dynamic to every individual customer's journey for us.
Do you
So
think when you look in the marketplace now, like say Groucho's is, I mean, what's the date of birth on Groucho's? Like it's
1941.
1941, okay? And then, we're going to set up Karl Marx's, which starts tomorrow, okay? Like, in terms of, like, go to market for technology for both of those, like, if you're setting up a restaurant today, or you're setting up a cafe, or you're setting up a deli, or whatever you're setting up, it's much more likely that you're tech-centric, tech-forward, in a way that someone like, at like a Groucho's, for example, didn't necessarily have that culturally, say, before you start. I mean, I know you've been there a long time, but I mean, like, if I take like an example of like Friendly's ice cream, it's
Right.
100 years old. Do you know what I mean? Like, you've nostalgia going with your parents, if your parents remember going with their grandparents. Not necessarily the most like tech forward. And we had them on the podcast, and they were talking about like redoing their entire guest experience and leaning into technology, bringing that brand from a 98-year-old brand to like a 99-year-old brand. And they expect like enormous legacy challenge, to your point that you were mentioning earlier. But I mean, in one sense, it's quite freeing if you were to start up again now. Like if one was to start like a restaurant or a hospitality business, that like the technology, albeit in kind of different form factors, closed APIs, you can use
Right.
a database if you want. It's there for you to help you optimize that business from the get-go.
Absolutely. I mean, I mean, what we have today is what I wanted in 2010, and just there was just too many limitations at that time.
Yeah.
Um, so, I mean, for us, it was a gradual adopting and morphing into where we are today. Um, yeah, I mean, anyone starting a new brand today, it certainly has an advantage over any sort of legacy brand because, especially at the operator at the store level, like changing out, like if you're going to change out point of sale systems, right? That's kind of the heartbeat of the store, so to speak. I mean, it's the brains where everything comes in and then the data goes out to wherever. Um, Change resistance is very real and it's very natural. And
Yeah.
you bring in a new point of sale system and people are just like, well, it doesn't do this and the old one used to do that. And I'm like, that's not the point. The point is we're evolving, we're changing. In 2 weeks in, they're like, how do we live without this? Because it makes our lives so much easier. So it's certainly a challenge. Yeah, I mean, anyone that's starting afresh now is if they do the homework and get the right advice and talk to the right people, and I think you need a modern tech stack to compete today. The market is unbelievably saturated, and it's only getting more and more saturated every day.
Okay. I mean, when you say saturated, you mean saturated with food options. Like, are you
Correct.
saying like not necessarily like other delis? You mean just like people can spend more money in more places to buy food?
Yeah, but I mean, you can't eat a deli sandwich every day. You can't eat Nashville hot chicken every day. You can't eat Chinese food every day. But if you have a bazillion of each of those, we're all competing for the same market, the wallet, and we're all
Yeah.
competing for the same market. So without the tech to understand your customers and personalize your marketing, how do you build this relationship with them, and how do you sway that journey to increase the frequency to take a monthly habitual guest to a weekly habitual guest? How do you do that without the data and the skills and the tools and the teams to do that? I mean, I just don't know how you would compete.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, you did say when we were chatting the last time that the habituality rate is like, I feel like that was a key figure for you. Like you kind of emphasized that a lot. whether you knew it or not on the chat we were chatting, that you had mentioned habituality, right? And I guess, you know, to add some color to that, because that seems to be a huge unlock from your CDP and from the data infrastructure that you built.
Yeah. So, you know, we're of the mindset we focus on guest retention, not so much guest acquisition, because I believe if you do the retention and the experience piece right, you can organically set the flywheel up for new guest acquisition. I mean, yes, you still have to go do things, but I think if you do it right and have the right product mix to appeal to a broad customer base, you can do that organically through these other mechanisms. But for us, you know, with our CDP tool, we're able to measure guest habituality dynamic to each individual guest, and we kind of break it up into like 4 big rocks. So, you know, we have your first time guest, right? And then we have an onboarding guest, which is visits 2 through 4. And at the 5th, we consider you a habitual guest. And then all of this, we're measuring your intervals between visits. So we have what we call the daily guest, super unicorns, not a lot of them, weekly guests, monthly guests, and quarterly guests. And then with the CDP tool, we can set up marketing automations. So if Adam has been coming in weekly for 6 months, and then we don't see him for 2 weeks, we can trigger a message to him. It's just something simple, right? And it doesn't have to be an offer. It's just a reminder. It's awareness marketing, saying we acknowledge you've been here. And everything's personalized to the customer. So, I mean, we're calling you by name. We're saying we haven't seen you. We know what you eat. People respond to that in a positive way. I mean, what we found, especially along with guest feedback, because we respond to all of our feedback, good, bad, or indifferent, is people just want to be heard. They don't necessarily want a discount. They don't necessarily want something for free. They just want to be heard and understood and know that you care. And care is definitely like 6 more podcasts we could have about what happened to care. But yeah, I mean, for us, we measure the guest habituality, the retention rates, and when we're measuring in these things, we're like trying to figure out, you know, can we take a monthly guest to a weekly guest, or can we increase your visits by 30, or your spend, or whatever the case may be. But again, without the data, how do you know this?
Yeah, totally. And I mean, like, I guess that's sort of, you know, the North Star here for the entire conversation that we had. That, like, without the data, how do you even know? You know what I mean? Like, as in, you don't know what you don't. Well, no, actually, better phrase. What did Donald Rumsfeld say all those years ago? There are known knowns and known unknowns and unknown unknowns. You know,
Right.
and I guess when it comes to like data, I think, like, you know, you can measure what you don't know. And for you to be able to lean into, for example, habituality, and be able to see Adam show up every week for 6 months and then not show up, but then not send him a discount where it's like, hey, our sandwich is $15. We'll give you 30% off if you come in the next redeem in the next 48 hours, which is just like, you know, everyone's kind of overwhelmed with that kind of message because it comes from everywhere because it's easy. First is like saying, no, you know, we're sending you messages like you're in a life cycle of an experience with us. And part of that is like an awareness type of message, just to know you acknowledge. When you were talking about like personalized care emails, I was thinking of like, you know what really irritates me as a consumer is all my banks have my name in capital letters, and they also have it as Alexander. And I honestly, I'm like, come on, guys, like it's easy to write a script or use an AI here to say, don't call him Alexander, call him Alex, and have it in sentence case. Like, I don't want to be screamed my name because then I know they're automated emails and I know it's a bank. Like, I'm not like foolish either, but like at the same time, I'm like, I'm judging them because of that, because it's so simple to fix, you know?
Yeah, I have multiple email aliases. So when I sign up for something, like you can immediately pick out who's spamming you. So because they're like, oh, you sent it to that email address, you have obviously sold my data to 7 other
Man,
services.
well, welcome to my job. Welcome to my job. To where a lot of my
To your
guests came
point about
from.
measurement, I mean, you don't know what you can't measure, but you can't improve what you can't measure.
Exactly.
Period.
I mean, exactly. And I mean, like, I'm very fascinated with the habituality thing because I think it emphasizes a degree of sophistication within the data infrastructure in and of itself. Like first and foremost, like if you kind of first principles all the way back, you know, what is habituality actually stems from understanding who the customer is in the first place, designing your ICP. What are the parts in the data that like make up an ICP? So like work goes into designing who that person is, what that person is, and then mapping out a whole customer journey on top of it and sort of a life cycle journey with that person. And then having a myriad of different trigger events inside of it, depending on the person's kind of behavior. I mean, like when I think about it, like it's an amazing infrastructure you've built, but also like conceptually, it is something that somebody could draw on a crayon. And I mean that in a nice way. And what I mean by that is like, oh, we want to measure like habituality. Okay, well, work back. And what are all the steps that go into that? And think about how you as a consumer would want to be communicated with.
I think this goes back to your question when you asked me how many people I have on my team. And I said, you know, it's more about the companies we choose to partner with. And, you know, I'll name drop. We use Bicky for our CDP. They are 100% restaurant specific. And, you know, they are building thoughtful, engaging tools that we can truly segment our customers 6 ways from Sunday. You know, the who, what, where, why, when, how, you know, all of these things. And you need companies, you know, so what if they did transportation and, you know, gasoline services too? I mean, that doesn't make sense. I mean, these guys, they know their lane and they're building to solve the problems and the data information that restaurant operators need today.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. And I mean, this is all very positive for the marketplace. And I think that's awesome. And I really appreciate you coming on here and giving me your honest, unabashed opinions on this topic, Deric. And it's like, it's a joy for me to talk about this because it's so rare that I get to talk about marketing. It's so rare that I get to talk about tech. Usually I'm talking about P&Ls. I am not an expert on P&Ls. But here, as a kind of final kind of swan song to the episode, what kind of advice would you give somebody listening to this podcast today, Deric? I mean, the audience is typically like executives in hospitality, hotels to casinos to restaurants, fine dining, QSR, you name it in between. Like, what advice would you give them? Last piece of advice. This whole podcast has been advice.
Yeah, I mean, I would say gather your stakeholders and take an honest inventory of what you're doing today, and is it solving for the problems that you have, the friction points that you have, and if it's not, what do you need? Identify where those are, and then how do you fix that? You know, and if you're on legacy systems, you need to bring the whole teams in and figure out how to get out of that game because it's just going to die. You know, there's only a handful of people that can afford to build their own. So, you know, you're going to have to go out. You're going to have to reach out. I would say educate yourself, take your time, and don't trust the car dealer that everything he says his Ferrari will do, right? Build a sandbox. Test. I mean, we're big on sandboxes. I mean, you don't know what you don't know, but what you don't want to figure out is you deploy this tool and it's a horrible user experience, not just for your customers, but also your teams, right? I mean, teams embracing technology is a whole different layer. So, I mean, you got to make that seamless and intuitive, and actually some tech can bring more work to your operations.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's really figuring out where you are today and where do you want to go. And then that will help guide you to where you should be looking, I think.
All right, awesome. Well, Deric, you're an absolute legend. Oh, great. you got that point on your head. Which is great. Great advice. And I think you got to know where you're going to figure out your path of how you're going to get there. I think that's very fair. And you know, honestly, man, I appreciate this. This has been a joy of a conversation. I've loved every second of it, and I've loved every second getting to know you here. It's great to see that I see somebody with a similar ideology towards tech as me, which is great. And yeah, man, I mean, thanks for coming on. It's been phenomenal.
I really appreciate you having me. This is a great way to start a Thursday for sure. hopefully somebody will find some sort of nugget of information for some further ideation. I mean, that's why we all do these things, attend these things, and go to events is just to find that piece that we might have not thought about, right? So
Absolutely.
that's how I see it. And I mean, rising tide raises all ships.
You betcha.